HOA called Border Patrol. They shut down her HOA instead. It all started with a phone call that was supposed to intimidate her, but instead, it set off a chain of events no one in that neighborhood could have ever imagined. The HOA thought they had the upper hand. They thought their threats would silence her, but they had no idea what storm they had just unleashed. The story begins in a quiet neighborhood where people move for peace, safety, and community. At first glance, everything looked perfect. The lawns were cut neatly. The houses looked almost identical. Families waved at each other in the mornings. On the outside, it seemed like the kind of place anyone would want to live. But behind those polished fences and spotless sidewalks, something darker was brewing. The Homeowners Association, better known as the HOA, had turned into a controlling power. They were not just making sure the neighborhood stayed beautiful. They had gone far beyond that. They had started bullying homeowners. They nitpicked every little thing, from the color of curtains to the type of flowers planted in front yards. And if anyone dared to push back, the HOA was quick to strike back even harder. Among those homeowners was a woman who refused to be silenced. She wasn't looking for trouble. She wasn't trying to be a hero. She simply wanted to live in peace and enjoy her home like everyone else. But when the HOA crossed a line, she decided she would no longer back down. It started small. Letters in the mail, notices posted on her door, fines stacking up for the most ridiculous reasons. Sometimes it was about the length of her grass. Other times it was about her car being parked a little too close to the sidewalk. The HOA seemed to watch her every move. It was harassment dressed up as rules. At first, she ignored it. She paid some fines, argued over others, and tried to let it go. But the more she ignored them, the bolder the HOA became. It was as if they had singled her out. Every week, another notice. Every month, another fine. It became a battle she never signed up for, but one she was forced to fight. One day, the HOA escalated things to a level no one expected. Instead of just threatening her with fines or legal action, they called Border Patrol. Yes, Border Patrol. They reported her family, claiming that she had people living in her home illegally. It was a shocking, heartless move. They thought this call would scare her into submission. They thought it would break her spirit. But they were dead wrong. When Border Patrol arrived, the truth became painfully clear. This wasn't about immigration. This wasn't about safety. This was about harassment and abuse of power. The woman stood firm. She explained everything. She showed them her documents. She told them the truth about what the HOA had been doing. And in that moment, the officers realized they were being used as tools in a personal vendetta. That's when the tables turned. Instead of her being investigated, the spotlight shifted to the HOA. Why were they making false claims? Why were they abusing government resources for personal grudges? Why were they targeting one homeowner so viciously? Neighbors began to whisper. People who once stayed silent started to speak out. They admitted they had seen the harassment too. They confessed they were also scared of the HOA, but hadn't dared to stand up. This woman's courage gave them a spark of bravery they didn't know they had. The investigation into the HOA grew bigger. What started with one false call to Border Patrol turned into a full-scale inquiry. Officials discovered the HOA had been abusing their power for years. They had been targeting homeowners unfairly, issuing bogus fines, and pocketing money in shady ways. The more investigators dug, the uglier the truth became. The very organization that was supposed to protect the neighborhood was poisoning it from the inside out. The HOA had betrayed its own community. But the most shocking twist came when authorities shut down the HOA itself. Yes, the same HOA that tried to destroy one woman's peace ended up destroying itself. The false call to Border Patrol had backfired so completely that it exposed everything they were hiding. The woman who once felt powerless had now become the reason justice was served. She didn't set out to fight a war. She didn't ask to be a target. But when the HOA came after her, she fought back with truth, courage, and persistence. And in the end, she won. Her story spread across the neighborhood, then across the city, and soon across the country. People everywhere related to her struggle because so many had faced similar battles with overreaching HOAs. She became a symbol of resilience. Proof that even one voice can expose corruption when it refuses to stay silent. And here's the lesson that echoed through every home in that neighborhood. Power can only control people if they let it. The HOA thought they could bully her forever. They thought fear would keep her quiet. But courage is louder than fear. Truth is stronger than lies. And justice, no matter how long it takes, always finds its way. So, the next time someone tells you that you can't fight back, remember this story. Remember the woman who stood her ground. Remember that one phone call meant to scare her became the reason an entire HOA crumbled. And remember this, your voice matters. Even against the biggest bullies. Even against the ones who seem untouchable. Backhand index pointing right. If you found this story powerful, don't just stop here. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Share it with a friend, a neighbor, or anyone who has ever felt powerless. Because sometimes the story of one person's courage is all it takes to inspire another's. The moment the HOA was exposed, everything changed. The fear that once kept neighbors silent started to vanish. People who had avoided eye contact at board meetings now stood tall. For the first time, the community realized they weren't alone. The HOA had thrived on intimidation, but now the truth had shattered that illusion. Investigators uncovered shocking details. They found emails where board members mocked homeowners. They found financial records showing money being misused. They even found evidence that certain families were targeted because they spoke out or didn't fit in. The lies ran deep, but so did the courage of those finally willing to speak. Neighbors told stories that had been buried for years. One man admitted he'd been fined thousands of dollars for keeping his work truck in his own driveway, even though no rule actually forbade it. A young couple shared how they were threatened with eviction because their dog was too big, despite the fact that the HOA had approved their pet in writing. Story after story painted a picture of an HOA that wasn't protecting its people. It was preying on them. The woman who started it all became the voice of the community. At first, she didn't want that role. She had only wanted peace for her family. But now, people looked to her as the one who had broken the silence. She gave interviews. She attended city council meetings. She told anyone who would listen what had really happened. Her voice shook at times, but her words carried power because they were born from truth. News stations picked up the story. Headlines appeared online. HOA shuts down after calling Border Patrol on Homeowner. The story went viral, not just because it was dramatic, but because it was relatable. Millions of people knew the frustration of dealing with overbearing HOAs. The story gave them hope. But the fight wasn't over. Some board members tried to defend themselves. They claimed they were only enforcing rules. They said they had acted in the best interest of the community. But their excuses crumbled as more evidence came to light. It became clear that this wasn't about rules. It was about control. The government took things seriously. Officials declared the HOA dissolved. They froze its accounts. They announced new oversight for HOAs across the region. What started as one false phone call ended up sparking real change, not just for one neighborhood, but for many. The woman often sat in her living room at night, reflecting on everything that had happened. She thought about the fear she once felt when notices piled up at her door. She remembered the sick feeling in her stomach when Border Patrol knocked. She remembered the way her hands shook as she explained the truth. And she remembered the relief, the overwhelming relief, when justice finally arrived. Her neighbors now stopped by to thank her. Kids who once played in silence now laughed freely in the streets. Families decorated their homes without fear fines. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt like home again. And yet, her story is more than just about one HOA being shut down. It's about courage. It's about the power of truth. It's about how one act of bravery can ripple outward and change lives. Because here's the truth. Bullies only win if people stay silent. Whether it's an HOA, a boss, a neighbor, or anyone else misusing power, silence is their greatest weapon. This woman proved that when silence is broken, bullies lose. Her story became a warning, too. It told HOAs across the country that power cannot be abused without consequences. It told communities that they had the right to stand up. It told homeowners everywhere that they were not powerless. Imagine for a moment if she had given up. Imagine if she had stayed quiet after the first notice. Imagine if she had panicked when Border Patrol arrived. None of this would have happened. The HOA would still be in control. The neighbors would still be living in fear. The abuse would still be hidden. But she didn't give up. And because of that, everything changed. So, if you're listening to this right now and you feel powerless, take this story as proof that you are not. You may feel small. You may feel like your voice doesn't matter. But it does. Your truth matters. Your courage matters. And sometimes standing up for yourself doesn't just free you. It frees others too. The HOA thought they could silence her. Instead, they silenced themselves forever. Backhand index pointing right. If the story touched you, don't let it end here. Share it. Talk about it. Let it remind you that no matter how dark things seem, there's always a way forward when you stand for truth. Because courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being brave enough to speak, even when your voice shakes. And remember this, one woman changed everything. You can too.